Hey guys, so in this video you and I are going to talk about Gulp and Grunt and build tools for JavaScript, so let's get into it. Now, we are going to talk about these for a very good and particular reason, which is this, let's just call it build tool trend. Because trend is the most common word in the JavaScript ecosystem these days. So, to give you a little bit of history, it used to be the case back in the day that when Node became popularized and all these different build tools came kind of around, you had things such as Bower, for example, for package management. And at the time, Node and Npm were kind of just starting out and they became popular. And when they kind of sprung up, one of the first build complement tools to doing common tasks were introduced. And one of the first ones is Grunt, which you may know about. It's fairly old school these days. And we had this very short little period in time where templating tools and build tools such as I said, Grunt, were kind of popular. And say Yeoman, I think that's another, I hope I pronounced that correctly, it was also fairly popular back in the day. And so people started using Grunt, for example, used it for everything from concatenating files to running different build tasks, optimizing images, compressing them, all of these different types of things basically that you could need a build tool for. And what then kind of happened was that somebody came around and said, hey, this is kind of slow, let's use Gulp. Or rather, let's introduce something called Gulp, which is basically the same, it's virtually the same thing as Grunt, but in theory it is slightly more performant. Now, both of these tools created this kind of ecosystem of plugins and accessory type of things that people added to it. So you had all of these different people creating everything from copying files plugins to more specific things such as, say, Webpack, for example. You can we actually use that at my company. We have Gulp, and we use Gulp for one of the things we do is that we have a storybook plugin for React Storybook, and then we have another plugin for Webpack itself, for running basically the Webpack dev server and so forth and so forth. And then a fairly, in my opinion, genius person, or rather a group of people started asking the question, why do we actually need Gulp and Grunt? Doesn't make real sense if you think about it. Most of what these tools are doing is to create a wrapper around existing functionality and allowing you to execute these things as part of a command or a chain of commands. That's it. And if you think about that, what do we have that already has such capabilities? NPM. We have NPM, and that's exactly how a trend started, where people migrated away from using Gulp and Grunt in favor of using NPM. Now, I am very opinionated about these things, as you probably can imagine, because I'm one of those weird guys who say that simplicity is the way to go always. The less stuff you have, the less odds there are that something's going to misbehave or cause you headaches or issues or anything like that. If you just grab the thing that gives you 80% of what you need and dive in every now and then to get those 20% from somewhere else, but always focus on that stuff. Nice to have is not good enough. So me and a lot of other people started pushing for standardization of running build tasks or scripts and so forth as part of the Node.js development experience. And NPM is yeah, it's the way I would say to go. I would say that unless you have a really good reason, and I'll tell you the only really good reason that I can see these days to use Grunt and Gulp, unless you have that particular reason, I would say that you should simply use npm. Use the script tag. It will do anything you can. I have never found a scenario where I couldn't do something, or maybe somebody out there can tell me. I've never found a scenario where using Grunt or Gulp made me feel like, yeah, this was much better than using the underlying thing that is wrapped in these plugins and just short-circuiting, going directly to the tool and using it as part of an npm script. It's even less work, less maintenance, less stuff, less dependencies, with one exception. And that exception is, drumroll, platform independence. So this is not true for all of the browser plug or the Grunt or Gulp plugins, but the one thing I have to admit that is a strong use case or a good reason to still use these tools is if you work in a multi-platform environment. If your developers are on different machines, Windows, Linux, Mac, and so forth, having that wrapper around the underlying mechanics or the thing that is supposed to be happening, like say copying files, for example. With tools such as Grunt, you don't have to account for that, because that's something that's a problem in npm scripts. If you use something like npm script, you can absolutely get around it, but in its most simplistic form, which is the form that I like it in, you have to assume things about your environment. Now, I work on a MacBook, and most of the developers that I work with also work on a MacBook. It's fairly common. But if you work in an environment where not everybody is on a MacBook, you have two choices. Either you get everybody a MacBook, or you use Grunt and Gulp. So on the discussion of whether or not these tools are going away, I think the answer is, as it commonly is, no. They're not going away. They still have a purpose. But I do think that unless they fit that exact purpose that I was describing, if you don't work in a multi-platform environment, then I highly recommend that you simply use npm script for all your development. It's simpler, and simpler is better, in my opinion. Have a great day.